Brexit. UK politics appears to be in a crisis, certainly at a crossroads. Is a no deal now inevitable? Stephen Booth joins us from Open Europe. Stephen, it's good to talk to you. Let's begin on that note. Is your base case that a no deal is now inevitable?
Well, I think we just need to remember that that's what Parliament has legislated for. So currently, if nothing else happens, the UK and the EU are on course for a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. The question is, we're heading for a very momentous week in British politics in Parliament when it returns this week, and that could change the course.
OK, well, let's examine that and ask you then what is due this week in Parliament, because I see from certainly some of the weekend reports that it's now more than likely that when Parliament returns, Labour's not going to force an election. I think that's a little bit of a change in direction as well. What does happen?
Well, it seems that the MPs from various parties that want to block a sort of no-deal Brexit have settled on a plan which would seek to legislate in Parliament by taking hold of the parliamentary agenda this week, presumably with the help of the Speaker, John Bercow, to effectively legislate to force the government to ask for an extension to Article 50 from the European Union. Now, I think the question marks are, first of all, do they have the numbers to do that? It's likely they probably might have the numbers to do that because there are sufficient rebels amongst the Conservative Party who would like to block a no deal. The second question is, do they have enough time? They only have a week or so to act before Parliament takes a break for prorogation. And that's doubtful. And the third question is, what does the government do with that request, and does the EU comply with it? Because there is no guarantee that just simply by forcing the government to ask for an extension that is actually what happens. And I think what is telling is that Parliament so far hasn't done any of the things which would guarantee that no deal doesn't happen. And there are three things, really. One is to vote for a deal. Parliament had three opportunities to vote for the deal that Mrs May negotiated with the EU and refused each time. There doesn't appear to be any majority for revoking Article 50. So basically saying we'd like to take our Article 50 notice away and actually stay in the European Union. Doesn't appear to be a majority for that. And lastly, there doesn't appear to be a majority for a vote of no confidence in this government and putting Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, which could ensure that you had an extension and an election before 31st of October.
OK, so if something happens this week, one of those things that you just discussed, if something does happen and it puts the government on the back foot, what does Boris Johnson then do?
Well, I think that's the question. I think that what I think the Prime Minister is trying to achieve is that he wants to force Parliament to have to make a choice effectively between deal and no deal. Because I think what he's trying to do in Brussels is clearly he's been very clear that he wants to get the backstop removed from the Brexit deal and that therefore be able to put a deal in front of Parliament. He also wants to ensure that the UK, if there is no deal on the table, can leave without a deal. And what he's effectively trying to do is knock out one of the three options that there's always been in this Brexit drama over the last 3 years, which is there are only three outcomes that are possible. It's leave without a deal, leave with a deal, or stay in the EU. And I think what I think he's trying to do is force those people who are saying they're anti-no deal to say what they're actually for. Are they actually saying they want to reverse the result of the referendum? Because so far, a lot of the people who are saying we're against no deal are reluctant to say what it is they actually want instead. And I think that's what Downing Street is trying to do, is trying to force the issue and force those people to say, well, what would you vote for?
Well, clearly Brexit is a highly emotive subject, so by its very nature it's brought all of us pretty much into the discussion. It's on every single page of the main papers these days from one angle or another. But deals are often achieved at the last minute in any negotiation. Do you think, therefore, that ultimately there will be a deal that is hammered out, even if it is a sort of an extension in a cloaked way to make it appealing for the British people, to enable everybody to get back to the table, to then take something further forward, ultimately to achieve what has been a big part of that referendum target as to see the UK out of the EU, in other words, a Brexit. Do you think something will be achieved 2 minutes to midnight at the very end of October?
Well, I honestly think it's very hard to know whether that will be possible. I think particularly those people in Brussels will be looking to see what Parliament does this week. I think that there is certainly a hope in Brussels that Parliament is able to prevent the government leaving without a deal on the 31st of October, and then again the pressure is off Brussels. I think if the Prime Minister does come through this week with no deal still on the table, then I think that does again put the ball back in the EU's court and says, well, look, we're leaving without a deal on 31st of October. Is there room for compromise on the deal that we've been talking about, along the lines that we've been talking about? And then whether the EU does move or not, I think is still open to question. But I think there has been some signs, at least rhetorically, from Brussels, but also Berlin and Paris, that there might be some scope for compromise. And then I think a deal might be possible. But I still think, if you look at this from where we are now, both sides are quite far apart. But I do think Downing Street would like there to be a deal they could put to Parliament at the end of this, but they want the choice to be between a deal and no deal.
What about Europe's side on this? Has Europe learned anything, do you think, from this? I mean, clearly we had Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel. They come from a background where they want to see a lot more integration, perhaps maybe not the same sort of integration between the two. And I know that this is the federal idea of Europe, but has Brexit brought it home to the hierarchy within the European Union that things are not all right?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think there has been, the President Macron in particular has had sort of many kind of high hopes and aims for further integration of the EU that so far haven't necessarily moved forward, certainly at the pace he would have liked. I think that, yes, there's been a lot of rhetoric that the EU needs to respond to Brexit, either in terms of further integration or making sure that they take more people with them in terms of future integration. But in reality, I think that what you've seen in the EU, not just as a result of Brexit or following Brexit, but in the years preceding that, there has been quite a lot of sort of stagnation in terms of what the European project looks like going forward. And I think ultimately that stems from any real lack of fundamental agreement between France and Germany about what further integration of the EU, but in particular the Eurozone, might look like. And I think the question will also be, well, what kind of relationship does the EU have with Britain on the outside? Because some of the other issues that the EU is talking about, such as integration of foreign policy and defence, are really kind of meaningless discussions unless there is some view about how Britain fits into the picture on those things, because the UK will remain a big player in Europe, come what may, on issues such as foreign policy and security.
Yeah. OK, look, Stephen, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much indeed for joining us. Stephen Booth, joining us there from Open Europe.